All right, folks. It is Halloween month. It is spooky season. We all love spooky season, but no one loves it more than the gays. And because of that, and because last time we recorded, Liz made me listen to her talk for an hour about straight people learning about ghost mysteries, this time I get to talk about ghost mysteries, and they're all very queer.
Mm. Welcome to This Is Lit, a podcast where we drink and talk about our favorite books. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey.
So raise a glass and let's get started.
Do this. Okay, Liz, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking Diet Coke and vodka because I could not get any ginger ale to do a Jack and Ginger.
Ah, is that what you were craving?
Mm-hmm.
I am drinking a Paloma.
Ooh!
Which is a grapefruit and tequila soda kind of. Originated in Mexico, but it is a Latinx kind of drink. So it seemed appropriate for today because we are discussing Aiden Thomas's Cemetery Boys.
It is also Halloween, thus my stylish headgear and skull earrings. I had a planchette pen that I was going to wear with my Ouija board sweatshirt, and then I listened to the Astonishing Legends episode on Ouija boards and decided if that pen starts moving on my sweatshirt of its own volition, it's all getting burned.
Y'all superstitious people, which is interesting for today because, yeah, we picked this book partially because I've been wanting to read it since it came out in September. It is a very new book. But we also picked it because it is set around Dia de los Muertos. The author, Aiden Thomas, I think this is their first book, and it was published on September 1st of this year. So this is your warning right now. This is your only warning. I'll edit in some sirens here probably. There will be spoilers for this book because if you've ever listened to our podcast before, we basically go through the plot.
Yeah.
And most of the time, I don't want to send away listeners. But in this case, if you haven't read the book and you have any intention of doing so ever, leave now. Close
this
the podcast.
This book is so good.
Exit out of the window. I want you to read it. I want you to enjoy it. I don't want you to hear it secondhand. If you haven't.
This book is so good. It is worth it to just pause this podcast and go read it because it is such a good book. I do not want to steal the joy of the story from you.
Exactly. The experience of reading it was fantastic, and I strongly encourage you to do so. If you're a person who listens to podcasts instead of reading books because it's an easier way to do it for you, and that's what you prefer, that's fine. But if you have any intention of ever reading it, do that before you get spoiled by us.
Yeah, for sure. For regular listeners, you're going to notice I'm going to try and let Casey kind of take the lead on this one because I do my best to be an ally to the LGBTQ community, but I myself am not a member, which Case is. So you guys do not need another straight person telling you how you feel about your own stuff. I'm going to let Casey express their opinion more so than me.
Okay. Like we said, Aiden Thomas, he wrote this book and published it in September. I do believe it is his first novel. Can you confirm that for me, Liz? Do you know? Did you check that out at all?
I believe it is because I found them on Twitter.
Okay. It's Aiden Thomas's first novel, and it follows the story of a young boy named Yadriel. And also, full disclosure, Liz mentioned earlier that I was going to be taking the lead on this one. That's partially because she took the lead on the last one, and that's partially because I am actually part of the trans and gay communities. But neither of us is part of the Latinx community.
Definitely not.
So obviously we can't speak to those experiences. And also our pronunciations might not be great. I did try to look up words that I knew I was going to have to say more frequently and the pronunciations, but I do apologize in advance if I butcher it.
I apologize too. I failed Spanish.
I
took 4 years of Spanish, but I didn't learn any of it.
Sometime I'll have to tell you about how I took my verbal Spanish final while my teacher was going into labor. It's a good story, but it's for another time. Because today we're talking about Cemetery Boys, and we're already very off track, as is our way.
Yes.
You wouldn't like us if we weren't. But so Cemetery Boys is set on and around Halloween and Dia de los Muertos, which is a Spanish holiday, the Day of the Dead,
Yes.
where it is believed that the deceased relatives of Spanish people can come back and visit their families from beyond the veil, beyond the afterlife, whatever. You've all seen Coco. You know the general gist of Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
Also, it's been unfortunately misappropriated, and sugar skulls have been stolen by capitalist culture, but you know what Day of the Dead is. The story follows Yadriel, who is a young boy, and
he's 16, isn't he?
He's almost 16, I think.
Almost 16.
15 or 16. The story gets interesting right away because it would be interesting enough to follow a trans and gay teenage boy navigating the culture of his family on Dia de los Muertos. But this book is not just a coming of age story. It is my favorite genre of all time, magical realism. I love magical realism. I feel like it's really kind of a challenging genre to balance because unlike fantasy, like a Tolkien fantasy, where you've got, this is in a separate world. There are entirely different races of beings, like elves and dwarves and things. And magic is just like commonplace. Magical realism, if you're not familiar, kind of is settled in reality, as the name suggests. So kind of it's like everything is pretty much normal, but there's an undercurrent in that of magic existing, and that can manifest in lots of different ways. I guess technically, like monster books, like like Twilights and werewolf books and things like that.
I get
kind of fall into it, but
I guess kind of like urban fantasy can kind of also be considered that as well.
There's a lot of overlap, but magical realism in general tends to focus really heavily on incorporating magic and supernatural elements into the normal life. Like
it's kind of like nobody can say Freddie Mercury isn't a siren, but have you met anybody who doesn't know all the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody?
Yeah, exactly. So like the difference between magical realism and like maybe urban fantasy is that like in urban fantasy, you've got, vampires going about their business. And then they're in the real world. But in magical realism, the characters in the novel generally have that magic deeply embedded in their lives, and it's part of their day-to-day experiences.
For Yadriel, this is completely and 100% part of his culture being am I saying it right, brujo?
A brujo, yeah.
Brujo.
Yes. So brujo is the Spanish word for witch, although it doesn't exactly mean that in this context. Basically, the way it works is that there is a family, a large extended family of Spanish descendants from all sorts of the places. I think Yadriel's family is from Cuba, and then another one of our protagonists, Julian or Julian, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, is Colombian descent. So there's a bunch of them from bunches of different cultures, but basically these people are descended from the ancient Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incans, and follow the same cultural practices and traditions as them, specifically involving the dead. And ghosts in this universe are real, spirits rather. They don't like it when you call them ghosts. And yes, they come back on Dia de los Muertos. Brujos are able to see spirits all the time. Any spirit that's around, any spirit that has not gone through the veil, can communicate with and interact with brujos. And I'm not sure how to pronounce the X in Spanish. Brujex, I guess.
Maybe.
That's, the gender neutral because there are men and women such like.
Yeah, but the magic for men and women is different because they are blessed from their magic by Lady Death, who is
Lady Death is almost their goddess.
Saint. Yeah.
She's a saint, but like even whenever I was part of a religious family, we were Protestant Southern Baptist, and so Protestants in general, and especially Southern Baptists, don't really believe in like praying to saints. That's more like a Catholic heavy thing. So I don't really understand that concept at all. So in my brain, I was just like, Lady Death is their goddess, essentially.
Yes.
If that is incorrect, I do apologize. But again, I never really had association with that particular brand of religion. at any rate, she is their goddess. She's the one who bestows their gifts on them. They have their quince when they're 15 years old, or the year after they turn 15, kind of like quinceañera, which is just the like coming of age ceremony. It is also when they come into their powers in full and are recognized as part of their community.
Yes, and there's a specific ceremony they have to do, but again, it's different for men and women.
Yes, the ceremony is different for men and women because they have different skills. They have different magical abilities. The women are skilled healers, and they use animal blood to heal everything from a burn on your arm to a stab wound. And then the men are kind of the protectors. Their job is to send spirits on to the afterlife, because spirits, other than the ones that you see at Dia de los Muertos, are people who have refused to go beyond the veil for whatever reason. They are attached to like a physical object, something that they owned in life that was meaningful to them, and they refuse to go on.
And the longer they stay here on the earthly plane, the more chances there are for them to kind of lose who they are and become corrupt. So it is
was it maledicto?
Yeah. It is is the job of the Brujix, the Bruja and the Brujos, to prevent that from happening.
Yes.
So they send spirits on to the afterlife before they become a problem here on the earthly plane.
That's right.
And so since Yadriel is transgender, his father, since Yadriel does not have the power to heal, I'm probably butchering this completely.
No, it's more of the way that it works. Yes. So men are, well, let's finish talking about what the men actually do. The men, their job is to protect the community, because most of them live in and around this graveyard in Los Angeles. That's where the story takes place. And the men will send spirits on when they become malico. It's malignant, essentially.
Yeah.
But they send them on by severing the tie between them and their artifact, their item that ties them to this life. And I'm not sure, the book doesn't really get into depth about like whether this is, I assume there are other covens, so to speak, in different parts of the world. But this is the coven that we're following. And their policy is generally to allow a spirit to continue to haunt wherever it's hanging out, as long as it does not become dangerous and lose itself. Because once the spirit loses itself, it becomes essentially a monster and very violent and has to be untethered.
And nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that. So sometimes the spirits ask to be untethered right away. Sometimes they stay for a little while and then decide when they're ready to leave. And sometimes they have to leave by force. But generally speaking, the Brujo try not to make them leave by force if they don't have to.
Yeah,
only when it becomes dangerous.
If one of their members dies, they come back for a day on Dia de los Muertos.
2 days, yes.
2 days, yes. So Yadriel is very much looking forward to seeing his mother.
Yes, his mother has passed away in the previous year, and she is really the only person in his life who is supportive of his identity. Because as we mentioned earlier, Yadriel is a trans boy, and he is struggling immensely because the only person who was supporting him was his mother. She's the one who bought him his first binder.
And his cousin.
And his cousin. But his father, it's interesting because his father clearly loves him. His father seems to be trying to understand, but the line for his father is very significantly, you cannot become a brujo because you were born female, which means that you should use your healing powers. If you do not have healing powers, then you cannot go through ceremony.
Yeah, because then you weren't granted the magic. And his father has to deal with this because his father's older brother was not granted the magic of the Brujo. Yes.
Yes. So generally speaking, there's a lot of like really heavy backstory and
yes. A lot of heavy backstory here.
Lore to this book, which I personally love, but it's kind of hard to make sure you cover it all before you start talking about it like the audience knows. So we're trying to give you as much detail as we can so we don't have to stop and explain it to you along the way. Yeah. But yes, so generally speaking, the leadership of a clan or a group of Brujex is passed down to the oldest son, But as the years have passed between the Mayans and the Aztecs, the strength of the brujos has waned.
There were rumors, there were myths that the original bruja, when they were healing somebody, would be able to bring somebody back from the dead.
Yes. They used to be powerful enough to bring someone back from the dead, and these days they cannot do that. They actually, the more difficult the healing is, the more damage they do to themselves by taking it on. And also, they have also stopped doing human sacrifice.
Yes.
Which I'm sure all of us heard in some history class somewhere about how savage and violent Aztecs. Sometimes I wonder how much of that is true and how much of it has been like dramatized by like, you know, Columbus and his crew coming in.
How much of it is propaganda to make the people that
right
look like heathens?
Well, yeah, because I mean, in reality, obviously, there are descendants of the Aztecs and the Mayans, but a lot of the Mayan culture disappeared entirely. And so there's not really anybody here to defend or tell their side of the story. Obviously, I'm not out here condoning human sacrifice. I just sometimes wonder how much of that was true. You know, I don't doubt that human sacrifices happened. You see those in every culture, including Christianity. But of course, this book kind of plays up that because it has a supernatural horror element to it.
Yes.
And
everyone can agree human sacrifice is bad.
Yes.
But
Yadriel's his grandmother, Lita, which is short for Abuelita, which is actually grandmother. His Lita is constantly telling them about Zilbaba, which is it's essentially like
Xibalba? Isn't it Xibalba?
Xibalba? Yes.
Isn't it in Road to El Dorado?
Well, yeah. It's not the afterlife, like the pleasant afterlife that we've talked about.
It's kind of like purgatory.
Sort of like a purgatory or like even a like mild hell.
Yeah.
Anyway, there is a jaguar god, Balaam, who lives there. And he was locked there by Lady Death. This is kind of a very traditional origin story that you see in a lot of different religions, where a good god locks away a bad god to protect the humans, and that god must never be freed again, et cetera, et cetera. That god could only be freed by 4 simultaneous human sacrifices using some ceremonial daggers, which Lady Death destroyed when she locked Balaam away, with the exception of one set, which she gifted to the Brujeres, and so that they could carry on the memory of it, essentially, kind of that concept of if you don't know your history, you're going to repeat it. And Yadriel's Abuelita has kind of turned it into a scary fairy tale to keep the kids in line.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if you're not good, Balaam will come and get you. I have the ceremonial daggers. I can summon him to take you away. You know,
La Llorona.
Very, very, yeah.
If you're not good, La Llorona will come get you and drown you.
Yeah, it's a very traditional kind of grandmothers in all sorts of different cultures have their different, their different monsters that they'll threaten.
They're boogeymen. Yes,
my great grandma always threatened us with the banshee because she was Irish, and she would say that the banshee will come for you. And it was great when the wind would howl. She's like, oh, there's banshees, things like that, or the Morrigan. Yeah. So
I would not want to mess with that one.
I think the Morrigan's cool. But anyway, this is kind of, again, we're not Latinx, so the best way we could equate it is to our own culture, and I do not mean that in any way to be demeaning to these other cultures, and obviously, but trying to explain it in a way that makes sense to all of our audiences who are not familiar with the concept. So she's got these ceremonial daggers up in the attic, and she's constantly telling them stories about him. But they don't do human sacrifice anymore. Obviously, it's the 21st century. They use chicken blood for their healing. The bruja do.
Yes.
And then
or pig's blood.
Or pig's blood. Yeah, animal blood.
Yadriel's cousin Maritza is also a little bit of an outcast of the family, along with his uncle, who doesn't have the power because she is vegan. She refuses to use animal blood for her healing, so she doesn't.
Well, she can't heal without it, so she just will not heal. Simply,
and they kind of won't let her try to heal without it.
Yeah. Well, she's basically rejected one of their kind of traditional tenets, and that makes it difficult for them to like accept her ways of thinking. So she's basically decided she does not want to be a bruja in the traditional sense, and does not want to become a healer. She wants to follow in her father's footsteps. His job is
He's a smith.
He's a smithy, and he makes daggers. They are ceremonial daggers, and I'm trying to find the name of it because I have to look at it in order to pronounce it correctly. Portaje.
Portaje? So it's their portal.
Yeah.
Or I kind of like mentally referenced it as a totem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's essentially that. But for the brujo, it is their portaje is a ceremonial dagger, and that is what they use to sever the cord that keeps a spirit attached to their artifact. It actually made me think a lot of Greek mythology and like the three fates, who cut the golden threads that tie you to your life force. So that was interesting. It's always very interesting to me from the perspective of somebody who used to be very heavily religious and study a lot of different religions, to see how religion and cultural stories, there's like crossover and common threads in them. Yeah, exactly.
For bruja, their portaje is usually a rosary.
With a little vial on the end that they can keep blood in.
Yes. So since Yadriel's kind of coming of age ceremony was indefinitely postponed, his father will not even let him try to become a brujo. So his cousin makes his dagger in secret.
Yes, she again, because she has decided not to be a bruja and to become a healer like the other women in the family, she has decided she is going to follow in her father's footsteps and become a smithy to make portaje daggers for the men. And so she makes one for Yadriel in secret, and they decide to hold his quince on their own. And that's where the book starts, is with Maritza and Yadriel sneaking around the graveyard to do his quince in secret.
The moment I knew I would love this book was when his cousin was like, remember why you're doing this? To prove that I'm a brujo? No, the other thing. Spite? Spite.
Spite. Yes, this book has very good...
the teenagers are teenagers.
Yeah, very good portrayals of teenagers. At any rate, Yadriel and Maritza go to perform his quince in secret at night. They seem to succeed. They have to sneak around a bunch of different... there's always someone on graveyard shift duty in the graveyard to make sure that overnight none of the spirits turn malignant. And they have to sneak around them, as well as the gardener Tito, who was the gardener for the cemetery in life, and in death has decided that no one else will do it right, and that he will continue to do it. So he is taking care of the marigolds for Dia de los Muertos, because the bright colors and smells of the marigolds are said to help the dead find their way back from the afterlife. They run into him. He's kind of a grumpy old man, and he kind of sends them on their way. I don't want to know what trouble you guys are getting up to. Just go on. And
don't stomp my flowers.
Don't stomp on my flowers. And they go and they perform the quince, and everything goes perfectly. Obviously, there's a lot. The thing about this book is there's a lot of lore, and then there's a lot of internal feelings and thoughts from Yadriel specifically, but from really all the characters, because they're all kind of experiencing different things and going through things differently. And so, of course, Yadriel is kind of afraid it won't work. After all, he was born female. What if Lady Death denies him? That would just be confirmation that his father was right. It maybe means that he's not meant to be a brujo. Maybe it means that he's not meant to be a man. Basically, it's like he's afraid his own goddess, who he believes very strongly in, is going to deny his gender identity. So it's a very tense moment for him, but everything goes great until they feel a very intense pain. All of them are kind of psychic. They have kind of a psychic link. They're all family, very distant and extended family. Maritza is his cousin. Another cousin of his, Miguel, who was on the graveyard shift, has gone missing, and they have all felt him die. They are all connected to they have kind of a psychic link, and they can feel when another Bruchix dies. And they all feel stabbing pain, and Miguel is dead, but they cannot find him. So a lot of chaos happens, and they basically slip out and end up hiding in an old church at the other end of the cemetery that's just never been torn down. And while they are there, they meet Julian.
Don't they try to bring back Miguel's spirit to ask him what happened, and they accidentally summon Julian?
Yes.
Julian?
Yes. The thing is, Yadriel is there's a lot of steps to this process. There is, the quince, where you actually use your portaje and become, approved by Lady Death. And then during Dia de los Muertos, you have to go through another ceremony in front of everybody, kind of like, baptisms in a Baptist church, where you are basically accepted into the clan. And somewhere in the middle there, you do have to release a spirit to prove your ability. And so he's very gung-ho. He's like, I want to get everything done, prove that I've done it, and then just be like, you have to accept me into the community during Dia de los Muertos. Especially important to him because it's the first year since his mother died, so she will be there to see him accepted as a boy. And so when they realize that Miguel has been murdered and they can't find his body, they sneak into the old church, and Yadriel attempts to summon Miguel. And instead, he gets Julian Diaz. And they find his anchor, which is a St. Jude's medal on a necklace.
Saint of Lost Souls.
And he is immediately abrasive, freaked out, doesn't know what's going on. And it becomes clear very quickly that he has not been dead for very long at all. In fact, he remembers being alive the day before. So the fact that they have summoned back this teenage boy who they do recognize, that he actually goes to the same school as them, although they do not run in the same circles. They've summoned back a teenage boy who apparently died the day before Miguel under mysterious circumstances that he can't remember. That immediately Yadriel is like, is there a connection here?
Something has to be going on.
Something has to be going on, but he is still very focused on sending a spirit on so that he can be confirmed by the community. So he attempts to sever Julian's life force, and it does not work. Julian does not want to die, does not want to go into the light. And
no, he wants to know what happened to him.
A very strong-willed kid. He wants to know what happened to him, and more importantly, he's very concerned about the friends he left behind, because the only thing he remembers before his death is that he was defending a smaller, younger friend of his from some strange man. And as a result, he is worried that that friend and maybe his other friends are in danger. So he strikes a deal with Yadriel, that Yadriel can send him on and use that to prove to the community that he deserves to be a brujo, but only after he helps Julian find his friends and make sure that they're okay. And then in here we have some hijinks, of course, because it wouldn't be a teenage coming-of-age novel without hijinks. And the hijinks mostly consist of Yadriel trying to hide Julian, because Julian is tethered to his anchor, which Yadriel is wearing around his neck, which means they go everywhere together. The problem is that all of Yadriel's family, who are all very close, very nosy busybodies, can all see spirits. And so if they see the spirit of Julian, they'll know that he summoned a spirit before he's so focused, he has to go through all of the steps. And that really hit home for me. For trans people and for really any queer people, in my experience, it's a very common misconception whenever you first start coming to terms with your identity that you have to be like the ideal version of that, right? So like if you're trans, you have to pass, you have to be stylish in the gender that you are passing as, you have to have dysphoria, which is wild. Like you actually have to actively feel bad about your natural body. You also have to not constantly get mad at people if they misgender you. to be the ideal trans person, to be a good trans person. And so I feel like with Yadriel, this has manifested as him being like, I will go through every single step and ceremony that we have before I tell them. And then they can't deny that I'm a brujo because I did everything exactly right. Because technically, he's not supposed to have done it in secret. That's technically blasphemous. But he figures that'll be overlooked if they take into account that he did everything correctly and followed all of the rules to a T, which is, in this case, it's specifically about his association with his culture. But the fact that he is trans is tied very closely to it. And I thought that was interesting.
And his family is not really giving him the chance to do it out in the open, really, to prove himself out in the open. Because like his, early on in the book, his grandmother still misgenders him.
Mm-hmm. She even calls him by his dead name at one point.
Yeah,
which is do that.
I know that's a big no-no.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I have a kind of a rule about books with trans characters. If a cis person decides to write a book with a trans character in it, or anything with a trans character in it, book, movie, script, if I hear that character's dead name at all, I dismiss the book. I don't need some cis person to come in here and be like, well, just so you know, their dead name was blah, 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 but now we call them this and I'm woke. I accept it in this context because it is shown as incredibly harmful to his psychological welfare and incredibly damaging to his relationship with his father. And the author is a trans person.
Well, and I've often heard it said that, have those characters, have that diversity, but don't tell their story if you can't associate it with it personally.
Well, and the other thing is, and obviously this is not necessarily the case with this novel specifically because
definitely not.
It is a YA coming of age novel, so there's a certain amount of like self-reflection and identity questions that have to be in it. Even for like cishet YA coming of age novels, like you're still questioning who you are and what it means to be yourself. That's part of being a teenager. But queer people are not allowed to have any other stories. Like the vast majority of stories that queer people get in media are about their queerness, which is wild because constantly we're told not to rub it in other people's faces and that they don't care, just mind your own business and go about your life. But then when they write us for TV or for a book or for a movie, it's like, my name's Sassy McSasspants and I'm gay. If that's going to be a problem, we're going to fight. It's kind of the same thing of how women in movies have to talk about how they're tough and they're not like other girls. It's this whole concept of if the character is not a cishet white man, their entire story arc is either going to be for the benefit of that cishet white man or about the parts of their identity that are not cishet white or male. If that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense.
And in this book, again, it's a little bit different because it is a coming of age novel, and that's the entire point of coming of age novels.
Yeah. The main character just happens to be a trans boy.
Right. And I don't think it even comes up until a good 10 or 11 pages in, like whatever. They're sneaking
No,
through.
It doesn't. The only reason it comes up is because the author is trying to explain
why they're sneaking
why
around.
His family won't let him do this and why he's sneaking around in the middle of the night trying to prove himself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So anyway, needless to say, he's very focused on this. When it doesn't work, that gives him a kind of fear that maybe something did go wrong after all. He's got to hide Julian. He's got to go to school and not let anyone see that Julian is with him and not let Julian distract him from his classes. Lots of those traditional hijinks.
Yes.
And then after school that afternoon, Maritza and Yadriel and Julian and Maritza's two pit bulls, Michelangelo and Donatello, who are named after the Renaissance painters, not the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I have to say this. Pitties, if you've ever met a pitty, are the sweetest dogs.
They're very good.
They're so
sweet. These two are kind of fat and dumb, but they're very sweet. But they are scary looking, and so she takes them along to keep them safe. Julian leads them to a kind of hangout area in an underpass. Mm-hmm. And the first thing they see here, and I'm not going to say it in Spanish because I know I'd butcher it, but I will translate it for you because the book I don't think did. And I don't know, you were reading a hardback copy, so I don't know if you took time to translate things.
I had Google Translate up on my phone.
The nice thing
like
about
I said,
reading,
I took Spanish. I didn't learn it.
right. I know a fair bit of Spanish, but the nice thing about reading on a Kindle is that if you just highlight the word, it will give you a definition and a translation if necessary.
Oh, that's nice.
On the wall, graffitied in spray paint is some girls have penises, some boys have vulvas, and some transphobes have no teeth. There's lately been a surge of this rhetoric online.
I understand why. Well, it is an election year, so political discussions are getting exceptionally heated. We are recording this episode October 29th. Yeah, we have 5 days left until the election is over.
Well, it won't be over because the thing is, an unprecedented number of people are voting absentee and mail-in this year. It may be 2 or 3 weeks until we know the results of the election.
Side tangent!
Ooh!
If you have not voted, please go vote. Wear your mask.
Double side note, we have no plans to change our schedule for recording and releasing episodes. We do still have plans to do November and December 2 episodes each. But with the knowledge that the election may essentially drag on through the entire month of November, and
our
with
mental health may decline.
So anyway, side tangent over. Back to the plot here. Yes, the graffiti. I loved the graffiti. Trans folks have no teeth. This is pretty much Yadriel's first indication of how Julian feels about trans people. Because whenever Julian met them, it was dark, it was nighttime, he was scared. And when they got into the light into his house, he mistakenly misgendered Yadriel. Maritza corrected him. And he just rolled with it. He's like, oh, okay. Just kind of stared at him for a second and moved on. And this is also something that
should do. Say, oh, I'm so sorry, and move on. Mm-hmm. Don't make a big deal of it.
Yes. But the thing that's funny about it, that I don't think a lot of cis people understand, and that Aiden Thomas does an excellent job of portraying, is that even if the person who made the mistake did it in a completely innocent fashion, and even if they apologized and moved on, your brain sticks on it. Not just because you feel bad being misgendered, but also because you're analyzing whether or not they really are okay with it, because you can't tell unless they explicitly say, I'm cool with trans people, just because there are so many people who still aren't. So the fact that Julian kind of squints at him and goes, oh, and moves on, then it's in Yadriel's head. He's like, is that going to be a problem? And he dwells on it. I think Thomas does a really excellent job of kind of expressing that thought process, because I don't think, and that's not me saying that I want, cis people to feel bad if they misgender someone by mistake, because we all make mistakes. I misgender myself sometimes. Here's a big trans secret for you. Trans people sometimes misgender ourselves because society has ingrained us in something. And for me, I was in my mid-20s before I came to terms with my gender identity. So I was so used to using certain pronouns for myself. And so, it happens. And that this is not in any way me trying to make people who genuinely are making a mistake feel bad about it. But I do think it's important for them to realize that that's the case, because then they understand why that mistake is so severe, I guess.
And I know you and I have been friends for a very long time, and I love you from the bottom of my heart, and I have accidentally misgendered you, and I have apologized.
Well, sure. And we also, we're content creators.
We are.
And, we both also voice act for another podcast, Radio Free Puppets. We've talked about it before on here.
Yes, and the season of Dick Meteor is actually about to complete. So if you don't know what that is, I actually write that show. So another side tangent warning. Go find that, Dick Meteor, Intergalactic Private Eye. I actually wrote that. So if you like Doctor Who, you will like it.
Yeah. So we both did voices on Dick Meteor, and in the weeks leading up to the release of the premiere episode, there were little bios of all the voice actors that went up on social media. And whenever I sent mine to the producer, I put my pronouns in there, just a reminder. This is a person who already knew my pronouns, and I put them in there. And whenever I saw him recently in person, he said, well, thank you for doing that, because honestly, it didn't even occur to me. And that's the thing that cis people have to understand. It doesn't occur to you because you don't have to think about it, whereas we are thinking about it literally all the time.
It takes zero effort to ask somebody what their pronouns are. Zero.
That is what's so valuable about this book. Like, even if this book were not excellently written, paced, and intriguing with good character development and
rips
fun
out my
dialogue, even if it weren't those things, this book is maybe for the first time putting a trans person in front of somebody. I mean, obviously, to me, it's more important that trans kids are seeing it, because when I was 15 years old, I would have never found a book that had a character like me in it. And the fact that they do fills me with joy, but also all of those cis or heterosexual YA lovers and readers who read this book, for some of them, this is going to be their first encounter with the thought processes. You know a trans person, okay? You all know a trans person. You might not know you know a trans person, but you do. But some people don't have people who are close to them who are trans, and so they don't have someone to teach them those things. And honestly, we shouldn't have to, because that emotional labor is rough. So I think there's a huge amount of value in how passionately and lovingly Aiden Thomas crafted Yadriel's inner monologue. It's very, very honest and very raw. And people are going to see it and be like, oh, these things have never occurred to me before. And it makes me want to change and do better. We're all learning constantly. So I think that's a huge value, you know?
I will say, in like the first couple of chapters, when Yadriel was talking about his big extended family that he still loves and, you know, values their opinion, and what it did to him when they constantly left him out or misgendered him. And with me being a mother, I'm like, I would never, ever want to put my child through something like that.
Things like this book, like, it sounds trite to say that, but the fact of the matter is so much of society and culture are shaped around the stories that we tell each other. And one of the books we're going to be reading in November, we'll delve a little bit more into that.
Yes.
But so much of society is shaped by these stories that we tell each other. I mean, there's a reason that, spoken language started with like oral histories passed down, because we all want to tell stories, and those stories mean something to us. They tell us.
Even major religions are just based around stories we tell each other.
Terrible. Yeah. So it's all a teaching mechanism. And what Aiden Thomas has done here is offer an opportunity for young trans people, young Latinx people, to see themselves in a main character, which they have probably never seen before. The second thing that he has done is create a very good YA novel that any kid will want to sit down with. I'll tell you another fun secret that I don't think I've ever mentioned on this podcast before, which is wild. My personal journey to come to terms with my sexual orientation and identity can be directly followed on my Goodreads profile. If you go to my Goodreads profile page, it's under Casey Aarons. You can look at the books that I have read and put them in order chronologically. And you will see in about, I think, 2010, 2011, and then again in about 2013 or 14, I spent months reading nothing but gay coming-of-age YA novels. Not because I identified with them, because I love reading, and I especially love YA novels because they're a lot quicker and flow. But like, I just would pick them up and then I would devour them and I'd get another one. And there weren't many. Like, if you look, there's not a lot there, but you'll see them on there and you'll see them repeated. So like, it might help somebody find themselves. It might help somebody understand somebody else better. This book makes the world a better place.
It does.
Not to be over dramatic or anything, but
thank you, Aiden Thomas.
Yeah, thank you so much. It means so much to me.
And it's so good for other readers, like people who, like me, who are cis, white, hetero, to kind of get out of our own comfort zone in our own area. And it helps us kind of build that sympathy and empathy that we desperately need in the world today, where it's just like, we can get into the mind of somebody who is trans or somebody who is gay or somebody who is just a different race from us. And we can learn so much just by reading a book that we're enjoying. And then next time we have an interaction with someone who is different from us in real life, we can still think back on those characters and be like, maybe I can use a little bit of compassion so I don't make this person, this real person, feel the same way this fictional character did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an invaluable resource, and I'm so grateful to have it. Let me wrap up the summary here. I know we're running short on time. Yadriel finds Julian's friends, Omar, Luca, Rocky, and Flaka. And Flaka is also trans, and she's actually the first out trans person that Yadriel ever knew. They weren't close, but they were in a math class, I think, together in school, and never really interacted. But the first time he was brave enough to wear a binder to school, she kind of gave him it's kind of like how Jeep people have a nod. Like queer people also have a nod.
How what? People have a nod?
Jeep people.
Jeep people?
Yeah, you've never heard that before?
No.
Okay, well, look it up after this. Jeep people like wave at each other when they pass each other on the highway. I've seen it happen. I've ridden one of my friends in college had a Jeep, and every time I was riding with her, anytime she'd pass another Jeep, they'd do this kind of. It was wild, but yeah.
People are crazy.
Well, yeah, they have a car that can turn upside down and be okay. Well, Subarus are for lesbians, Liz. I hate to break it to you.
I drive one. What does that say about me?
You're a lesbian. You should tell your husband.
He's gonna be so disappointed.
Anyway, so he meets them. It does not go well. Omar is very suspicious. Yadriel is very, very bad at not looking at Julian, who no one else except for him can see.
Because he's hot.
Well, because he's talking to him. And then Julian is like, don't tell them I'm dead. He's freaking out. And he basically he picks up a skateboard and flings it on the ground. And of course, everyone sees this.
It's Ghost.
But no one else can see Julian. So they beat it out of there really quick. And they're followed by Luca. And while Luca is following them, Julian starts yelling at Yadriel, saying, you were going to tell them I'm dead. And Yadriel says, no, I was not. And he won't listen to him, and he's very angry. He's got a very hot temper, Julian does. And finally, Yadriel says, I don't out people. And that hits home with Julian, because Julian has already told them that he is gay. And now Yadriel is starting to realize that he is absolutely fine with trans people based on the graffiti, based on the fact that one of his best friends is also trans.
Which, that is also a good rule, is you should not out somebody else.
Absolutely.
That's not kind. And you also should not force somebody to come out to you. That's also not kind.
No. As someone who has been very abruptly and violently outed on multiple occasions to people who I really did not want to be outed to, it's not just rude and mean, it's actively traumatic. And it's not your right. You have no right to do it. And queer people know this for the most part. Again, like, I don't want to paint an entire community with like the same brush. Obviously, there are different parts, and there are even people in the queer community who are, racist or, biphobic or homophobic or whatever, lots of different things. People are complicated, but within the community, there is an understanding that outing someone is a shit thing to do. So him saying this is enough to bring Julian down from his, it's almost like Julian, they never call it this in the books. I mean, Yadriel has a lot of anxiety, clearly, that a lot of it stems from his identity and from keeping all these secrets in the midst of this specific situation. But they never really say that Julian is anxious. He seems very self-possessed and confident, but he has these explosive bursts of anger. But to me, who also has explosive bursts of anger, when I'm panicked, it reads much more as anxiety response. I think it
quite possibly.
I just think it manifests in fits of anger instead of like withdrawal, which can happen.
I withdraw when I'm anxious.
I mean, for me, it depends, but in the case of Julian, I could definitely think there's a case for saying that he has some anxiety, because it takes him saying something very significant for him to come down from it. And that's right about the time that Luca walks up on them and basically asks them point blank, is Julian dead? And Yadriel doesn't say anything because he doesn't out people until Julian tells him that he can. And it's really hard because Luca is the littlest of the group. He's the one that Julian was protecting whenever he was apparently killed. And it seems that Julian is very protective of him, very brotherly towards him. And Luca is taking his death very hard, but says he'll keep it a secret and that he will help them to get in contact with Julian's older brother, Rio. And then they make a plan to meet with Rio, see if he knows anything about what happened to Julian, and to steal one of Julian's shirts so that they can attempt to get these two very, very dumb pit bulls to sniff him out. And
they are good boys.
Yes. And
there are no bad dogs, just bad dog owners.
There are no bad dogs, but there are some stupid dogs, you know? I live with them. So there's a lot that happens in this book, and a lot of it is very like heart-rending conversations. There's a lot going on. We do find out that Yadriel's mother died. He says there was a car accident. I kind of interpreted it as she died healing someone from a car accident. Did you get that?
I mean,
he specifically says that she had oftentimes.
His mother was such a loving person that I could definitely see it. That she's like, I will give my life so that this person can live.
Right. And well, he even specifically says that there had been times that she had pushed herself too far in healing.
Yeah.
And actually done damage to herself.
And it was an accident, and she just might have pushed herself a little too far.
Right. So, like, I don't know if she actually died in a car accident or if, like, the car accident was the circumstance that led to her death. It wasn't exactly clear to me, but I do think that makes
it could also just be a car accident because traffic in LA is terrible.
Well, it could be, but, like, from a narrative perspective, it's interesting to me, especially considering things that will happen later in the book.
Aiden Thomas, darling.
Tell us.
If you are listening to this podcast, which I hope you are, because we adore this book.
Listen to our podcast.
Aiden Thomas, listen to our podcast. Could you please answer this query for us?
Yes. At any rate, so during that time, he finds out that Julian reveals that his father was killed by a stray bullet in a drive-by shooting, and that his brother has been raising him since he was 20 years old, as well as all of his other friends. Rio kind of takes in strays, it seems, even though he's got a very small apartment and no money. Julian has insisted that Rio is better off without him, but he is willing to go because he does want to find out what happened to his body. And now that he knows his friends are safe, he wants to make sure they stay safe because they think that the same person that killed Julian probably killed Miguel, Yadriel's cousin, and maybe some other street kids who have recently gone missing. Because the fact of the matter is, if they don't have families, if they don't have a place to stay, they're easy targets and the police don't care. That's another interesting thing about this book is that Thomas very deftly interweaves both, obviously gender identity, sexual orientation, race, cultural identity, and social status. Because the fact that they're poor kids, the fact that they're kids of color means that the police don't care.
And the LA Police Department has been notorious for that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm. There's really just a lot more sneaking around, a little bit of heart-to-hearting. And at this point, you start to see Yadriel starting to develop an affection for Julian. He notices that he's handsome. He notices that even though he has, he's kind of an asshole and he has fits of like outbursts of anger, he's a very passionate, very alive, which is ironic since he's a ghost.
Oh, no, it's empty.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
But they go to see Rio. It does not go well because similarly to before, Luca and Yadriel walk in. Rio is kind of hostile towards them at first, and then he kind of opens up because Luca's insisting, says, oh, my brother ran away. He's never coming back. He said some really hurtful things to me. And of course, Julian is standing there listening to all of this and getting more and more upset. So Yadriel jumps to his defense, which upsets Rio because he does not know this kid. He's never seen this kid before. And his brother loves his friends dearly. And if he was really his brother's friend, he would know about him.
Yeah.
But Yadriel at this point is starting to fall for Julian and can't stand there and listen to his brother say mean things about him while he's overhearing them. But this does end with Julian kicking the door open, scaring everybody, and Rio kicking Yadriel out of his apartment.
It's like Ghost, the rules of Ghost. You have to build up enough energy to make something happen.
Right.
That can be love, anger, some strong emotion of will.
Right. So they go back to the graveyard. Julian is very upset, and they end up. And I might be getting some of these things out of order because I did finish the book this morning, and again haven't slept in like 5 days. But we get a little bit of introduction to Catrice, who is Enrique, is Julian's father, and his older brother Catrice doesn't really have any powers, and so was passed over as kind of the other black sheep of the family besides Julian and Maritza.
Yeah, so Yadriel really kind of Catrice is kind of Yadriel's confidant because
they have a kinship.
Yeah, they're the black sheep of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And they understand what it's like to be looked over, to be passed over.
Yeah.
And they both understand what it is to be alienated from your own family and kind of from your own culture because your culture is so traditional it won't accept you.
Yeah. And so we've already at this point, Yadriel has overheard Catrice kind of imploring his brother Enrique to allow Yadriel to go through his quince, which made Yadriel feel a lot of affection towards his uncle, towards his Tito, because he's standing up for him, but his father shut it down immediately, which really hurt Yadriel. But then we see Catrice again, and he sees Julian. They are sneaking out of the house again.
As per usual.
No, excuse me. He sees Yadriel with his portaje. So Yadriel has his dagger out in his hand because Julian has had a couple of episodes where he has flickered in and out of existence, where blood has stained his shirt and where he seems to have lost his focus and his sense of self. And
it's almost like what happened to his physical body is now starting to show in his spiritual form.
Mm-hmm. And Maritza is concerned that Julian is already turning malignant. Yes. And she encourages Yadriel to carry his portaje. So as he and Julian are sneaking out of the house, he comes down the stairs holding his portaje. His uncle sees him, smiles, and then intentionally drops what he is carrying to cause a distraction so that he can get out before his dad sees it.
Yeah.
So he's feeling like very good about that. It's really like giving him a sense of euphoria.
It's almost like acceptance.
Yeah, his uncle seems proud of him, and he thinks that he's probably going to tell Catrice about Julian, because it would be good to have an adult who is on their side.
Yeah.
This sneaking around is bad, and then his cousin Miguel is still missing. Dia de los Muertos is 2 days away. There's so much happening, a lot of chaos, and he's feeling very uncertain. And then he's got these romantic feelings happening for this boy right now, who is a ghost. There's a lot going on in this kid's life. They have a couple more conversations of note. And again, these are not completely in order. I just want to touch on some of the stuff that was important. One of the ones that I very much liked was whenever Yadriel tried to explain to Julian why it was so important that he go through with his quince, why he release his spirit, why he be allowed to stand up in front of everybody during Dia de los Muertos. Julian is like, why? Like, your goddess has already said that you're a boy and that she accepts you. Why is that not good enough for you? And he doesn't really have a good answer, and he gets frustrated, and he says, I am the first trans brujo. Julian says, no, you're not. You're absolutely not. The Incans and Mayans lived hundreds of years ago, and trans people have been around forever. They may have hidden it. They may have done things a little differently, but you're not the first. And it's kind of meant to be a chastisement, but it really starts to change the way Yadriel thinks about it. It really is comforting to him to know that he's not alone. And that, I think, is a good message to put out there because, again, gay people have been around forever. Trans people have been around forever. You can look at histories from ancient Egypt and find them. You can look at,
it goes all the way back to Greece and Rome and Egypt and from the beginning of time.
I mean,
this is not a new thing.
Even in religious books that are not pro-queer, you see queer characters. You see women who dress as men. You see two men who have a very strong bond that is stronger than their bond with anybody else, David and Jonathan, or you think of Ruth and Naomi. It's not new. and you're not alone, and it's always been a thing.
And there are translations that have been adjusted as times have, especially in religious texts.
And a lot of communities were very open to queer people, and then there was things go in cycles. People are very puritanical, and then people get more loose. You know, you've got your 1970s Summer of Love kind of thing, and then you've got your like Victorian England buttoned up. Things go in cycles. Even now, we're starting to see it online with some younger generation people. A lot of them are very, very liberal and very level-headed and want equality for everybody. But you'll see things like, you know, a Gen Z Trump supporter, or you'll see people being like policing the kind of, you know, content that other people make because it's not appropriate, and being like puritanical about things. Things come in cycles. So like, it's not always been this way. Like, society has tricked the queer community and queer teens and children especially into thinking that they are alone and that this is not a normal thing, but it has been around for way longer than any of the people who are telling you that have. So
yeah, and I know that you and I with the podcast have always wanted this to be the safe space for that community.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really liked that conversation that they had. And then they use the dogs to sniff out and try and find Julian. They go to the park where he last remembers being, and they find a rotten bag of tacos that he had apparently been carrying at the time, but they do not find his body. They don't find any evidence of a struggle. They don't find any blood, and Julian is getting very frustrated. And the two of them head home, and they're walking through the graveyard and kind of having a little bit of an argument because, again, Julian, when he gets stressed, gets very angry and explosive. Yes. And then Julian stops talking and looks behind him. Yadriel is terrified that his father is there because he knows his father is on graveyard duty that night. He turns around, and what is behind him? This was very scary. I wasn't expecting it. It went really sharply into the horror here.
Oh, yeah.
But what is behind him is Tito, the gardener who had died and continued to work in the gardens of the cemetery.
Yeah.
And he is standing there holding his shears, and his eyes are glazed over, and his tongue is purple, and he's got bruises all over his body, and he attacks Yadriel. His mouth comes unhinged. He jumps on him. He is trying to kill him. Incredibly violent, very scary, like body horror stuff. Like there's worms crawling underneath his tongue, which is purple and hanging out of his mouth. His jaw's unhinged. His eyes are blacked out. Like really intense, very scary.
Really, really, really scary. So definitely horror genre.
Julian manages to fight off Tito for long enough that Yadriel can pour blood onto his sword and start the invocation to cut Tito's life force. But then Tito gets the better of him, and he has him down on the ground and is beating him. And then someone cuts his life force from behind, and he disappears in a shower of marigold petals. And Yadriel sees his father standing there with his portaje out. And his father's like, "Are you okay? Oh my God." And then he sees Yadriel's portaje, which is just starting to turn back. They glow gold whenever the invocation is spoken. He sees it in his hand. He sees it fading from the gold back to its regular steel color. And he says, and Yadriel is terrified because, again, it was blasphemous for him to go through this ceremony.
Yeah, and his father doesn't wholly accept him the way he is.
And his father says, "You went through with your quince on your own?" He says, "Yes." His father says, "It worked?" "Yes." "Your blade was just glowing?" "Yes." And his father does a complete 180. He says, "If the goddess of death accepted you as a brujo, then you are a brujo. I am so sorry for the way I've treated you. And we need to talk about this more with your mother when she comes back tomorrow." And this scene was real interesting for me. I felt really
I was curious about your opinion on this scene.
Yeah, I had some really complicated emotions about this scene.
I bet.
I had to stop reading for a bit and process. Those of you who are longtime listeners know that I grew up in a fairly dogmatic Southern Baptist community, and that my father is a Southern Baptist pastor, and that they have some very particular beliefs about queer people, and that we don't see eye to eye on this. And I actually saw my father and my stepmom on Sunday. They basically popped in as a surprise. We're here, and we gave them a tour of the house. And at no point during the tour that they were being given of the house that we bought together that we were giving them a tour of together, did they acknowledge that I was married to my wife. So that was cool.
Oh my God.
So you all know that I have a complicated relationship with religion. And though this is not exactly religion, it kind of toes the line of being religion, right? Like it's a spirituality. Witchcraft is religious, but it's also like mythology. But since it's actually true, like it's complicated because it's like, on the one hand, like if a religion is not true, there's a different context than if it is. And in this magical realism world, their religion is true. Spirits do exist. The goddess of death does exist. But the fact that his father could not or would not fully accept him without the backing of the religion also accepting him first kind of put a bad taste in my mouth.
I understand that because there's a lot of people in this world who are just, that's never going to happen for them.
Like here's a good
and it
parallel.
Shouldn't take religion for you to accept your own child. It just shouldn't. Because then your love is conditional. And if you're a parent, your love for your child should be unconditional.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely complicated. Like, let me put it into simpler terms. Just recently, the Pope said some very positive things about LGBT people. And a lot of people got very angry at him. I'm sure there were also some Catholic mothers who heard the Pope say, things that were positive about queer people, and that started to make her feel differently about it. And on a very basic level, that's good. Like on a very basic level, anything that makes people change their opinions about this is good. On a more complicated level, you're still beholden. Like my value to you is still reliant on what you're being told by your religion. Even if like the way you value me is more positive, the way you feel about me is positive, you're only feeling positive towards me because your religion told you to do it, not because of your actual inner feelings, if that makes sense. It's kind of like complicated.
No, it makes sense. It's like I should have value to you regardless of what your religion says.
Yeah.
Because I'm your child.
And I mean, I'm not saying that, again, it's good. It's better than nothing. I'll fucking take it. But and even
but as a parent, you shouldn't be making your child beg for scraps.
But I'm not even talking about parents. I'm talking about anybody. Like, if you, I'm trying to figure out how to word this sentence. Give me a second.
Every person in this world has value. And even if that value is not to you, you should still treat this person as if they have value. You should not go up to somebody and say, you have absolutely no value because this person is not helpful to you or follows whatever your religion or your doctrine says. Like, as a Christian, I'm not going to go up to a Muslim and say, you have no value because you don't believe in my God. That is not what a good person does.
I guess for me, it's just a complicated thing with religion in general, because I think, again, if someone starts to change their mind about something because of something their religion tells them, and they start to change their mind in a positive direction, that's good. It's not the whole thing. You still have to work. And I do believe that the more, like, I mean, we've seen this time and again, the more that people are around people who are different than them, the more open they become to them. And so if your religion allows you to take that first step to be more comfortable around queer people, and so you spend more time around them, eventually you will genuinely care about them and not care that they are queer or find that they are queer okay. But it is still disheartening to realize that until that has happened, your change of heart was dependent upon the religion that was oppressing that person to begin with, if that makes sense.
Do you think it is the difference between just simple acceptance and to be accepted? Do you think, like, if somebody, like, their religion says, oh, it's okay now, then that still was a fight for that person to accept someone else as they are, and other people just accept it?
No, I think, I think that it's more complicated than that. I think, I mean, like, you can read this scene, for example, in two ways. You can read it as the goddess of death validated your gender, and so I must too validate your gender because she's my goddess and I have to listen to her. So it's kind of the same thing as, Mom, he stole my toy. Give your brother his toy back. I'm giving the toy back because Mom told me to, but I'm not happy about it. And the difference between, oh, I've upset you by taking your toy, let me give you back. So you could also interpret the scene as Enrique hearing that his son went to these drastic measures because he was not accepting him, and then having that confirmed and being like, you were trying to tell me and I wasn't listening. I'm sorry. And I think that's how the scene is meant to be read.
Yeah.
And I think that is a valid read, but because of my personal religious traumas, I kind of balked at it, which was unusual. And I don't think it was poorly written. I thought it was very well done. And like you still do see throughout the rest of the book, Enrique clearly loves his son and he is doing his best. And even whenever he did dead name Yadriel early in the book, he immediately apologized, even though he struggles with it. He, like, for Enrique, it seems less about him having a problem with having a trans son and more about, well, a trans boy can't be a brujo. Does that make sense? Like, they almost seem like they're compartmentalized.
You think it's more for Enrique, where it's like, he's not worried about him being trans. He's worried how the society as a whole will see his son and him as a father.
Yeah, I think it is, well, it's fine if it would be fine if he was trans. Like, I don't have a problem with trans people, but our culture is not kind to them. Yeah. And that scares me. And so I would rather reject
no culture is kind to the LGBTQ community.
From the perspective of a queer person, someone being like, I accept you being gay, but I wish you weren't because it's going to make your life harder. To us, that comes across as, you're more willing to enable the status quo than you are to be my ally in overturning it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated issue. And I think that Thomas does a really nice job of, and I'm sure there was intention in the way the scene was written. And I'm sure that different people with different experiences will have different reads on the situation. But it just took me off guard when I read it. I had to sit the book down and kind of talk out loud through my feelings about it, because I was relieved that his father accepted him, but I was upset that it required that he had to have that proof that his son was a boy before he did, So it was kind of complicated. But
I understand.
It was a really interesting scene. I think it was one of the most interesting scenes in the book, like, from the perspective of someone who has gone through some of these things. But let me wrap up our summary here, because I know we have gone way over on time. Editing this is going to be a nightmare.
It's an important conversation to have, though, and it needs to get out there.
Yeah.
I don't mind spending some time on it.
Yeah, and like we've said several times over this, the book itself is making these conversations happen.
Yes.
So it's super valuable. But there are more conversations to be had because we're not even done yet.
No.
So Enrique says, okay, luckily Enrique does not see Julian in this process. At this point, Yadriel is like, I'm not ready to tell him about Julian. I want to keep Julian a secret for now because I don't know how he'll react. He might want to free him right now, and I'm not ready for that because he started to develop feelings for him.
Yeah,
and
I'm not ready to let him go.
So he doesn't tell his father about Julian, but his father says, why don't you go home, get yourself cleaned up. Tomorrow, the three of us, you, me, and your mother, will talk about this when she has come back. And we can talk, and I can, really get into the things the way I've wronged you and apologize. And that is one thing. It's like, even though he did have to have that catalyst of Lady Death accepting his son for him to accept his son, he does seem willing to make efforts to change his behavior.
Yeah, as a parent, you never really know how you hurt your kid.
Hurting your child is inescapable because we all have emotions, and anyone that
even
you
if it's
spend,
unintentional.
anyone that you spend a large portion of your life with is going to hurt you at some point. The real issue is, what do you do once you realize you've caused that hurt?
You don't get to decide if you hurt somebody.
You're right. You don't get to choose if you hurt people.
No.
If someone felt hurt because of your actions, you hurt them. Period. And that's
it.
That's something that like we could all stand to learn from, that has nothing to do with gender identity or sexuality. But I do feel like queer kids learn it at a younger age.
Yeah, you do not get to choose if you hurt somebody. If you hurt their feelings, regardless of your intention, you still hurt their feelings.
Right. So Enrique does seem willing to change his behavior once he realizes that it has been hurtful, which is good. And he says, we will talk about this tomorrow, go back home. And that is huge for Yadriel. He is over the moon. He is thrilled. He goes home and he doesn't even notice until they get home that Julian has gotten very, very quiet. And he realizes that Julian is freaking out because what happened to Tito will eventually happen to him. And he feels like it's probably going to happen sooner rather than later. And he says, I want you to release me. I want you to send me on now. They get into a big argument, and Yadriel is able to get Julia to compromise with him that he will wait one more day, and at midnight, as the clock strikes over to Dia de los Muertos, so on Halloween at midnight, he will send him on. He gets Julian to agree to this. The next day, Yadriel makes it his mission to give Julian the best last day on earth that he possibly can. And they go get all of Julian's favorite foods to put on the altar whenever he does send him on. They go to a costume store and buy Yadriel a mask, a pull over your face mask with a skeleton on it, which was interesting. Since the book obviously was was written before the pandemic. I'm like, oh, now that's just a matter of course. But for him, it was just a Halloween costume. But they go get Halloween costumes. How are we going to get there? We'll take the bus. And Julian's like, no. We're going to steal my brother's Thunderbird. Rio has a beautifully restored Thunderbird that he keeps in the garage where he works underneath his apartment. A stingray. You're right. It's a stingray. And so he's like, we're going to steal the stingray. And he helps Yadriel get the keys to the stingray, and they take it to the beach. And that was the part where I was just like, wow. Like, I mean, definitely doing whatever he wants all day. That seems reasonable. I mean, within limits, because I mean, you're still going to deal with the fact that you committed Grand Theft Auto, but whatever. And so they steal the car, they go out to the beach party, they hang out there for a while until the cops break, and then they drive to a lookout point. And I had to kind of wonder at the time if Aiden Thomas has ever written any fan fiction, because there was kind of the cadence to the scene played out like in a lot of romantic fan fictions I've read. And that is not a criticism. That is a positive, because I mean, fan fiction, there is some really quality stuff out there. I
devour fan fiction.
Oh God, me too. But they sit on the hood of the car together, and they're watching the stars. And earlier on, Yadriel had asked Julian, why don't you speak Spanish throughout the day? Why do you stay to English only, even if you know Spanish? And Julian kind of explains, well, my dad did not speak English. And so in my house, we only spoke Spanish, and English was for school. And when he died, I felt like that was something that I had with him, and it was too intimate to do elsewhere. So, of course, inevitably, whenever the tension between them rises to be too much, he asks him in Spanish if he can steal a kiss. And, of course,
it's making me grin like a loon now.
Yadriel. Oh, it was very, very romantic, very cute.
So
they
cute.
Kiss. It's very, very sweet moment, which is interrupted by Yadriel's alarm going off to alert them that they have to get back for the Dia de los Muertos celebrations. They get back, and Yadriel and Julian split up so he can go get dressed. He tells his father, I'll be right back. And then he meets Julian in the old church where he found him to send him back. And it's very tense, and Yadriel is absolutely devastated about it. He knew that he shouldn't get involved with him romantically because he knew it was going to hurt him more when he had to send him on, and that he will never see him again.
No.
Because
Because once you go to the afterlife, that's where you stay. You don't come back for Dia de los Muertos. You just go.
Within the context of this story, the only people who come back for Dia de los Muertos are the ancestors of the Brujes. So he knows he'll never see Julian again once he sends him on. And it's breaking his heart. And so he goes through the process and he tries to send him on. And again, it doesn't work. The dagger bounces right off the life force cord. And Julian says, it's not me. I'm ready to go. I've made my peace with it. And that's about the time that
they realize something's keeping him there.
Well, both Maritza and Yadriel feel that very intense pain again, like they did when Miguel died. And then Julian starts screaming and completely flickers out of existence.
Yeah.
So they're kind of freaking out. And Yadriel uses the light of his portaje to follow the cord of Julian's life force. And they find an old abandoned crypt underneath the church. And in the crypt, they find a big well in the middle of a circle of 4 flat stones. And on the flat stones are 4 bodies. And they've all been stabbed just above the heart with the daggers that open up Zilbaba. They see Miguel's dead body. They see 2 dead bodies of strangers they don't know. And they see Julian, only he's not dead. He appears to be the last one who still has life force in him. He is dying, but he is not dead. His spirit moved away from his body, but he is not separate from his body yet. And I don't know about you. When I started reading this scene, as soon as they described what was happening in the room, I knew what was happening and I knew who was to blame.
Yeah, so did I. I mean, honestly, like, I know it's really, like, bad, but I have watched enough Expedition Unknown to kind of know a little bit about what was going on.
I will say, though, that it didn't occur to me before that. Because I even said, I was like, Lita has said multiple times, Yadriel, I need you to go get those ceremonial daggers for me out of the attic. I haven't been able to find them. I think they must be in the attic. She said it several times.
Yeah.
I did not interpret that as the daggers are missing. I interpreted that as she just didn't know where she had put them. But it was clearly foreshadowing that someone had stolen the daggers to do the scary human sacrifice ritual that will open up Xibalba and free Balaam.
Yes.
And the person who has done this is Tito Catrice.
Yes. Yadriel's uncle.
Yadriel's uncle Catrice, the one adult who has been supportive of him since his mom died, is the one who wants to open Zilbaba. And doing that first requires human sacrifice. So 4 people he has murdered. Second, will allow that jaguar god to eat all of the souls of the dead who have come back for Dia de los Muertos. So that means Yadriel's grandfather. That means his mother. That means everybody who has come back to visit their family will be dragged down into this horrible purgatory type hell. And
so will Julian.
And so will Julian. And Catrice is crazed. He says, I should have been the head of the family. The bloodline is dying. We're getting weaker. The only way for us to regain our original power is to go back to the old ways. I'm going to open this up, and then all of the living Bruex will understand that they can't cast me aside. And he kind of appeals to
I will hold power greater than any of them ever have.
And he kind of appealed to Yadriel. He's like, they cast you aside too. Why are you defending them? Why are you trying to protect them? And Yadriel says,
why are you trying so hard to be a part of that after they were so cruel to you?
Yeah. And he's like, you had to do your quince in secret. And then Yadriel says, thinking that this is something that will make his uncle see sense, although I could tell right as he was saying it that it was just going to make things worse. He says, no. My father accepted me. Whenever he found out that the quince was successful, he said that he would present me on Dia de los Muertos. He thinks that will be proof to Catrice that things can be changed. That Catrice interprets it as the one other person who is a black sheep like me has now joined my enemies. And it's really interesting It kind of creates
It's a very Professor X and
Magneto.
Eric Lynch.
I thought the exact same thing. I was like, although I have always kind of jokingly been like, Magneto was right, but the fact of the matter is, Catrice and Yadriel become foils of each other here.
They do.
The two sides of the same coin. Someone who is hurt and becomes more compassionate because of it and tries harder, and someone who becomes hurt and then wants to hurt other people.
There is an old saying, a child who is shunned by the village will burn it down just to feel its warmth.
And that sometimes is true, but sometimes people turn out like Yadriel and they want to be better.
But it takes an exceptional amount of compassion and heart and empathy to become Yadriel. It's a very hard road.
Yeah. So they have a very intense fight, and the jaguar monster starts coming out of the cenote, clearly cannot come out all the way until Julian's soul is sucked into the locket that Catrice is wearing. But Julian is still alive. If his soul is fully sucked into the locket, he will die.
Yes.
And so Yadriel is fighting tooth and nail to stop this. And Catrice is stronger than him. And even whenever Maritza comes down the stairs and joins him in fighting against their uncle, they cannot beat him. And so he has grabbed Yadriel, and Yadriel is hanging in the air and does the only thing he can think of and wrenches the locket off of his uncle's neck. And his uncle staggers backwards, trips, and falls into the cenote. And Balaam eats him. I don't know. Balaam
there's no nice way to put it.
Balaam bites into him and drags him down into Zildaba. It's a pretty grisly end. And Yadriel goes to Julian and tries to revive him. He takes the jaguar knife out of his heart.
And he can't. He can't survive Julian.
Yeah, Julian dies in his arms. He begs Maritza to heal Julian, and she is looking for her portaje to do so, even though she is against using her abilities. She is willing to do it for Julian, but she can't find her portaje in time, and Julian dies. And
she's like, I can't bring somebody back once they're dead, and so Yadriel implores Lady Death to come help him.
The thing is, they use animal blood, and this is kind of common in any religion or even in fantasies that feature magic. The most dangerous kind of magic that you can do is blood magic, which is to say magic using your own or another human's blood. That's why this sacrifice thing was such a big deal. And Yadriel,
there is life in the blood.
Yes, and so Yadriel decides to use his own blood to summon Lady Death. And she comes and she tells him that she can't bring back Miguel or Julian or the other two victims, and that she can't change things. And
but the power to right these wrongs is in your hands.
It is pretty funny because Yadriel just goes off on her. This is like essentially his goddess, and he's like, "Hey man, fuck you! What good are you?
What was the point of you coming if you can't help?
Like, you suck!" Like, it's incredibly blasphemous, and I'm 100% here for it. But she tells him he has the power.
Everybody gets that way if you're religious. You have to have that moment of doubt, or else faith doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm. So she tells him he has everything he needs, but that it will take a huge sacrifice. And he looks down at the locket in his hand that contains the 4 souls and realizes that he can heal them. He can bring them back from death using healing magic. And there's a couple of interesting things here to take into account. First off, we've had foreshadowing of this because Yadriel told us that his mother was too compassionate and that she often did damage to herself healing other people. The second thing at play here is Yadriel's willingness and compassion that he has, that he is willing to sacrifice his life, not just for Julian, who he loves, and his cousin, but for 2 complete strangers. And then the third thing is that up until this point, only Bruja have been able to do healing at all.
Yeah.
Even back whenever they did have the strength to bring people back from the dead, it was only the Bruja who could do it. And he's not a Bruja.
No.
But Yadriel crushes the locket and he frees the spirits and he brings all 4 of them back to life, and he collapses to the ground and appears to be dying. And Maritza is not having it.
No.
So spunky.
She's like,
I love
you are not leaving me here.
There's a very visual moment here of her in, those white flowy Dia de los Muertos, like traditional dresses.
Yes.
She's in a puddle of human blood, just soaking up into the cotton of this dress. And she just slaps her palms down into this blood, this mixture of Julian's blood and these other 2 dead people's blood and Miguel's blood and Catrice's blood. And Everybody. She summons all of the energy she can, and she brings Yadriel back from the brink of death. He's not yet died. His heart hasn't stopped, so she can do it. She uses all of that blood, and she uses all of her abilities. And Julian, this is the one chapter, or I think there's a couple here at the end, but it's from Julian's perspective. He wakes up, sees Yadriel on death's door, and watches Maritza be like, fuck no, not happening. She brings him back from the brink, and then she immediately collapses, having taken all of the energy out of herself. And Julian,
and then everybody finds him in the crypt.
Well, Miguel comes over.
Miguel is like, he's my cousin, and
I'll go get help, and brings everybody back down to the crypt. And it's a lot of chaos, and Julian is completely terrified.
He's beside himself. He's like, I am covered in blood. I don't know what happened. The person I love is lying in a pool of blood.
He almost won't let Enrique and Miguel closer to get at.
No, he's in shock. He's in shock.
Yeah. And he reminds me kind of a feral cat, like crouched over Yadriel's body. And eventually they get all of them to the hospital. And they are reunited. And Enrique, Yadriel's father, is given the rundown of everything. Then Julian attempts to bust out of his hospital bed to go and see Yadriel, but is held down by his brother and his friends from his family.
Yadriel is successful at busting out of his hospital bed.
And they share a very sweet kiss with their naked butts out to the air in their hospital gowns. And another thing that was very sweet about this is this moment when they kiss. Obviously, because they are in the hospital and they're in hospital gowns, someone has removed Yadriel's binder, and we actually see mentions of Yadriel's binder several times. Mm-hmm. But anyway, someone has removed Yadriel's binder, and he is very self-conscious about that, especially having Julian right up next to him, very close to him, while he is not wearing it. But there's an intimacy there and like a knowledge that he's not going to use that information to harm him. He's not going to be critical of his body or, tell him he should keep it that way because it's, he's just there for Yadriel. He loves Yadriel and he's happy that he's okay. And it's a very sweet moment. And then there's an epilogue, which is Maritza.
Everything I ever needed in life.
Maritza and Yadriel's final, kind of ceremony to be accepted into the community.
It's a very emotional thing because Yadriel never thought he would get this because of the way his dad felt about him and the way his culture was. And he wants that approval of his parents. He wants them proud. His mother has come back and is like, I'm so proud of you, my little brujo. And I want to hear everything about this lovely boy of yours.
So the ceremony in which new Brujeks are inducted into the adult world is called the Aquelarre, and the epilogue takes place during Yadriel and Maritza's Aquelarre. So this is done by Lita and Enrique as the heads of the family, his grandmother and his father. And his father gets up there, introduces everybody. Julian tells him he's a hero because he's the first brujo who has ever brought people back to life and the first brujex who has brought anyone back to life since the old days. And Enrique gives his speech to kind of welcome everyone and tell them that they are here. And there's a couple of lines in it that are very good. He says he's very proud that his son is there. He says, the Aquelarre celebrates transition. All of you are on the precipice between youth and adulthood, between uncertainty and confidence. Our traditions should grow and change with every generation. Just because we follow the ancient ways does not mean we can't also grow. And then he says, growth isn't a deviation from what we've done before. but the natural progression to honor all those who make this community strong. And then closes it out, which this is the final paragraph of the book, after his beautiful speech where he says we need to change and grow as a society and recognize that things are different and accept everyone who they are and induct them into the community. The final paragraph of the book says, things weren't magically fixed by an empowering speech, but it opened doors and built bridges. It carved out space for Yadriel to step forward and be who he was, as he was. There were still more obstacles to overcome and battles to fight, but Yadriel wouldn't feel alone in it anymore. And it wasn't the end. It was a better beginning. And I mean, really, that's all there is to say about the epilogue.
It's the perfect ending to this book.
Yeah.
It's just a perfect ending because it's not ending.
Yeah. It's the beginning of a better life for Yadriel and for his community, because they are going to be better because of it. And like, it's interesting because whenever I was early on in the book and Yadriel is talking about, you know, the women are healers and the men are protectors, I was kind of like, I'm interested to see where, like, I kind of, as a non-binary person, I was like, well, where would I fit into this? You know, and like, it's hard sometimes whenever you know an author that you're reading is queer, you want to trust them to do right by you and do right by the community. But so many times the books you've read have been queer stories written by straight people, and that's how you get barrier gaze, and that's how you get like queer people can't have a happy ending, and that's how you get well, they're going to win, but you know, they're not going to get to be together in the end. You know, different various tropes that are negative. And so you've seen so much of that. It's sometimes hard to trust an author, even if you know they are queer.
And this book, even though the two romantic interests are a gay teenager and a trans teenager, they still hit all the normal beats of like a typical romantic adventure. And they get their happy ending. And that is something that just a happy ending right now is just something I so badly needed.
Same. My God, same. It's it was a very good ending. And the thing is, it also kind of was an interesting thing from the perspective of a non-binary person who at the beginning of the book was like, is this book going to take care of binary trans people at the cost of non-binary people? But even before we got halfway through the book, Julian was like, well, what happens to trans people? What happens to non-binary or gender fluid or agender people? And then this final speech really kind of drives that home, that no matter how it changes, no matter what gender identity or sexual orientation or, you know, class status that the people in that community have, they are part of that community, and the community's job as a community is to welcome them and to not shun them. And they've had to learn this lesson the hard way with Catrice. And so Yadriel has been lucky that they learned it with him before it was too late and before he was hurt too far.
Yeah, the speech, like the book says, the speech is not going to fix everything, but the speech makes it where we're a community of people who, no matter what, are going to love our people, and it is unacceptable to not love any of our people anymore. And that is something that it's like, if some people, if they are given, you know, the okay to be isolating or to be discriminatory, are going to be.
But it works in the reverse too, because this speech, again, it's not going to fix everything.
No.
But if the leader of this community
says this is our morality standard.
Yeah, this is our standard. Not only is that going to make the people who want to be discriminatory hide away in the shadows or reconsider their position, it's also going to make people like Yadriel, who maybe aren't out yet. Like, I guarantee you, some of those younger Brewhecks are going to be like, hey, since I now know that my community is going to be, like it's making for a better community, and that's the entire point of a community.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it was a very, very lovely ending. And I felt bad at the end whenever I was like, that I had that hesitation at the beginning, and was like, are non-binary people going to get thrown under the bus? Especially when I went to Thomas's Twitter to check their pronouns and found out that he is actually non-binary trans. So even though he wrote about a binary trans boy, he is non-binary, and that message that he was spreading is for all of us. Because like I said, even within the queer community, there can be exclusion, and it's so refreshing to see that that wasn't the case, and see that this author...
I even know in the feminist community, some people don't consider trans women women. I'm like, they're a woman.
That's where you get from.
Yeah. So
I think it was a wonderful book. I cried through the entire epilogue. I was literally actual tears rolling on my face, and you know me, I'm not a big crier.
I know you're not.
But it was so, you're right. It's so rare that we get a queer love story with a happy ending. That it was just, and the way things are in the world right now, it was what I really needed.
Yeah. Everybody deserves their happy ending.
Mm-hmm. So how many bottles would you give Cemetery Boys?
I mean, it was a really good book. This was a book that it's like, by the time I finally had time to read it, I didn't really have time to get super in depth with it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a book that like, I want to revisit it when I have like a weekend away from babies and just take my time with it. Because I feel like since I had to kind of go pretty quickly, there was a lot of emotion and in-depth that I missed. And also, too, I would like to read it again now, knowing somebody's perspective who's in the LGBTQ community. Because I just always live by the creed, it's like, kindness doesn't cost you. I think I would give it, like, this is a fantastic romance story. And I love romance stories.
Yeah.
So it's a love story. And I love love stories. And I think I would the love story is crafted beautifully. And there's heartbreaking moments. There's humorous moments. I think I would give it 3.75.
3.75.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. But like I said, I would like to go back and revisit it.
Yeah. Well, I think I have only ever done this once before, and I don't even know if I have. I might not have ever done it. I think that Casey McQuiston's Red, White, and Royal Blue was my first 5-bottle review. It might have been a 4.5, but I'm going to give this 5 bottles.
Wow.
Yeah. The thing is, this book was made for me. It's like
I'm so glad.
I like a romance, but I prefer a queer romance. I've read too much het romance and seen too many, formulaic rom-coms to be super thrilled with those anymore. And I thought that the romance was very honestly written. It felt like 2 15-year-olds navigating first love for the first time. I felt like the teenagers were written well. I felt like the coming of age story that was in there was good. The coming of age, the queer coming of age story, and also the coming of age story very literally within his Latinx community. I also thought that the magical realism elements were very, very interesting. I love magical realism. It's my favorite genre.
Yeah.
And it's not a super, like, the brand of magical realism I love is not necessarily the most common thing. Like, it's much easier to find just a standard fantasy book than a magical realism book. It did a wonderful job of that. I love lore. I love world building, and it did excellent with that. Like you said, there were parts that literally made me cry. There were parts that made me laugh out loud. The dialogue was snappy. And yeah, I think it was very, very well crafted. I think it also was intersectional. For a long, long time, I thought that if you wanted to get a book published and it was a special interests book, air quotes, that is to say, like a queer book or a book about people of color, that would have to be the entire focus of the book. This book does a lot of things. There are supernatural elements, there are mystery elements, there are horror elements, there are romance elements, but also the book is not just about a trans boy. It's about a trans, gay, Latino, lower class boy. Like it sits at the intersection of and deals with the ramifications of gender, sexuality, race, class, and culture, all of them. Like, and I didn't think you could do that in a novel, much less do that in a novel and not make the novel entirely about that. Like to have another underlying story in it. I just think it was very masterfully crafted, and it's probably one of my favorite books I've ever read. Like I said, the last book I can think of that I enjoyed even anywhere close to as much as this one was Red, White, and Blue. Red, White,
now that I'm thinking about the other books I've given 3.75 to, I think I need to amend my stars. I think I need to change it to at least a 4.25. Because like I said, I didn't get to spend the time with this book I wanted, but I still loved it, and I love it enough to want to I want to read it again.
That does give it a final score of 4 5/8.
Let's just call it 4.75. Let's just call it 4.75.
4.75 bottom.
Round up. It's a good book.
It's a very good book. If you haven't read it yet, why are you even here? I hope we didn't spoil it for you.
Go read it.
You've been sitting here with us for I don't know how long. God, this is going to be a nightmare to edit. This is going to be a long episode. But yes, it's a wonderful book. Aiden Thomas's next book is called Lost in the Neverwoods, which seems to be kind of like a Peter Pan adjacent concept. There was an excerpt in the back of my copy of Cemetery Boys, but I haven't read it yet. But I guarantee you we will be reading that on this channel because I'm very, very impressed with this first effort here, and I cannot wait to see more from this author. Just to give you guys updates on what's going on, we had mentioned earlier that we still do plan to have our normal episodes in November, but always keep an eye on our social media to see if we need any changes for mental health reasons. Our next book will be The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I've to read it for a long time. I love the mythology of Achilles and Patroclus, and it's more gay romance.
Yay!
I'm just like gay romance all the time. Sorry, guys.
Oh my God, they were roommates.
Although we do know we won't have a happy ending.
No.
But that's our next book, and then we will be reading another one called The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin for the end of November. In the meantime, you can check out Liz's unboxing videos on our YouTube channel. We also have an Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook account, and our website, litliteraturePodcast.com.
Yes, and if you're feeling exceptionally generous, we do have a Patreon where I put up blooper reels from all of our episodes. This one's going to be a doozy. And we understand that times are tough, things are uncertain. So even if you guys can't financially support us, we would just appreciate it if you could just tell somebody to give us a listen.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening today. And I hope you have a very spooky Halloween.
And safe Halloween.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. For more information, visit us at litliteraturePodcast.com or check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. And remember, too much work and no vacation deserves at least a small libation. Cheers!